Well, Colonel Richard Kemp is a distinguished commander who led British forces in Afghanistan and Iraq. He has in-depth experience dealing with the threat of terror. I'm pleased to say he joins me here in Jerusalem. Now, first of all, before we get on to Hezbollah, I want to ask you about the Palestinian visa issue I've been speaking about, how the Albanese government has issued nearly 3,000 visas to Gazans without adequate security vetting. What do you think about this?
I think it's absolutely shocking. The first duty of any government is to protect its people. And clearly the Australian government in this case is betraying its people. Who do they think is going to get out of Gaza? It takes a lot of money to get out of Gaza today. And the people with money in Gaza are the people connected to Hamas. So you can guarantee, I would suggest, that the majority of those people, possibly all of them, are going to have Hamas connections and probably Hamas sympathies, and therefore they will potentially, at least some of them, will endanger citizens within Australia.
And even without that, I mean, we're seeing such extraordinary levels of hatred, of violence, of anti-Semitism. The idea of importing the conflicts from here to peaceful Australia is shocking.
Exactly, and we're seeing that the world over. We're seeing it in Britain as well as in Australia and other countries around the world, where people who have sympathy, they don't care about democracy, they don't care about peace, they have sympathy with terrorists, and they are intimidating Jewish populations because of their affinity themselves with Israel.
Yes. Now, I want to talk to you about the news overnight. Basically, Hezbollah has been beaten into submission. It's now calling for a ceasefire without Israel moving away from Gaza, which is a huge development, isn't it?
It shows the immense damage that the Israelis have done to Hezbollah, even just in the last few days, but certainly over the last year. They've been hitting Hezbollah very hard in southern Lebanon in particular, but also in Beirut, ever since Hezbollah began its war of aggression against Israel on the 8th of October last year. And they've effectively decapitated Hezbollah. They've taken out the leader of Hezbollah, Nasrallah. They've taken out many of the other senior leaders. And I think in this case, I've never seen such a widespread and effective campaign of attack against leadership of an enemy force. I think Prime Minister Netanyahu here is rewriting the book on targeted warfare.
Yeah, it's been utterly extraordinary. There's now debate and it seems like disagreement between the United States and Israel about exactly what the retaliation strikes against Iran should look like. Do you think Israel should be targeting the nuclear sites to stop Iran developing nuclear weapons?
Israel certainly should do that. Whether now is the time or not is an open question, because, of course, to do the maximum damage to Iran's nuclear program, it does need military support from the US. It can do damage, and I think it should try and do some damage. But there are other targets as well that can be hit, and those include energy installations like oil and gas. They include military bases, military facilities and capabilities. And all of these should be among the target range that Israel chooses. Whatever they decide to hit, they should hit them very, very hard. Last April, after Iran fired about 300 plus missiles and drones at Israel, Israel responded with a light touch. It didn't have the right effect because we saw a repetition.
Exactly.
Not at all. So now they've got to deter, and they've got to hit them, in my view, very, very hard indeed.
There doesn't seem to be the appetite from international leadership, whether it's Joe Biden in the United States and his VP Kamala Harris, whether it's in Britain, in France, in Germany, Canada, Australia. What's your comment on the international leadership we're seeing at the moment in the face of this very real terror threat?
The leaders in these Western countries understand the threat. They know that Israel's doing the right thing. They're just afraid of a country standing up for itself. They've forgotten how a country needs to stand up for itself to survive. It hasn't been a problem for most of these countries for so many years. And their priority now is to appease the anti-Israel mobs, who are in the minority in our countries, but they're a loud and vocal minority, and they want to appease them, and particularly so in the United States, where the election is coming up.
It's amazing how strong Benjamin Netanyahu looks compared to some of these other leaders.
Netanyahu, I think I haven't got the exact quote, but somebody in Australia said yesterday, I believe, that Netanyahu is the Churchill of our day, not the Chamberlain of our day. And I think that's absolutely right. He's an extremely strong leader. He's been criticised and vilified around the world by other leaders, including President Biden. But everything he's done has shown to be right and proved to be right. And when you have Hezbollah almost offering to have a ceasefire. When you have, for example, I think President Assad in Syria has spoken about getting Iranian militias out of his country. You have a very, very nervous Iran now, which doesn't really know what to do. This shows that Netanyahu's strategy is on the right foot. And Gaza's gone on for a long time now. That war's gone a long time, but it's a very complex war. But Israel's been extremely successful in that war.
I mean, a lot of international leaders are urging Netanyahu to wrap up the war, but the fact remains there are 100 hostages still being held in Gaza. So Israel needs to bring those hostages home before it can pack up and go home.
Israel must do everything it can. But I believe it's been doing everything it can to both defeat Hamas and bring the hostages back, and it must continue that campaign. There's obviously a friction between those two objectives, but they are potentially both achievable. And as far as Hezbollah is concerned, as far as Lebanon's concerned, we're hearing also from politicians in Lebanon huge dissatisfaction now with Iran and actually with Hezbollah and speaking out against it. Now is not the time, in my view, to come to any ceasefire in Lebanon. Now is the time to smash the hell out of Hezbollah as effectively and as violently as they can. Because if you have a ceasefire now without having guarantees of withdrawal of Hezbollah to the north, without having guarantees of disarmament of Hezbollah, all you're doing is kicking the can down the road instead of doing what you need to do, which is to smash the can to pieces.
It's fascinating how they continually call for a ceasefire and for, abiding by international agreements. But the reality is, after the Second Lebanon War, there was the United Nations 701 resolution, which said that Hezbollah needs to remain north of the Litani River. They haven't done that. Instead, they militarized the south. Yet the media around the world presented as somehow Israel being the aggressor. I mean, being here in Israel, and you've been in Israel for most of the past year, you see that there are hundreds of rockets a day targeting Israel in the north, targeting families in the north.
There was a massive barrage only yesterday against Haifa, further south in Israel.
Yeah.
Fortunately, the IDF have got the capability of intercepting most of these missiles, but you can't be. It can never be 100%. And I think the key issue here is not just Resolution 1771, which you mentioned, which requires Hezbollah to withdraw north of the Litani River, about 18 miles north of the Israeli border. There's also a previous resolution, I think it's 1559, something like that, which required the disarmament of Hezbollah. Neither of these two things have happened. And the UNIFIL, United Nations peacekeeping organisation, has 12,000 peacekeepers, or had 12,000 peacekeepers in Lebanon, whose job is to enforce it, yet it hasn't happened.
And no calls for a ceasefire, by the way, while Hezbollah was firing on Israel, only when Israel starts to respond.
Exactly.
Good to see you, Colonel. Appreciate your time here in Jerusalem.
Thank you very much.